What if the thing you call being in control is actually the way your trauma taught you to survive? What if you're constantly analyzing people's moods, overthinking conversations, trying to predict what someone is going to do next, trying to make everyone happy, trying to make sure nobody leaves, trying to make sure nothing goes wrong? Because somewhere deep down inside of you, there's still a little version of you whispering, if I can control everything around me, maybe I'll finally be safe. But what if healing isn't about gaining more control? What if healing is about finally realizing you don't have to control everything anymore? You can let go. You can breathe. You can trust God. And you can finally say, God, I don't know what you're doing, but I trust you. And I know for someone who has spent their entire life trying to create safety for themselves, these might be some of the hardest words to say. Because surrender sounds so beautiful when you're already at peace. But surrender feels terrifying when you're used to surviving. Today's episode is one that I have been thinking about deeply because we're talking about something that sounds so simple, but can actually be incredibly difficult when you've experienced emotional pain, instability, rejection, abandonment, or childhood wounds. And that is surrender. Today's conversation was inspired by ideas from Rami Shapiro's book, Surrendered, and the concept of surrendering our attachment to control. And I want to explore that idea through the lens of healing from childhood trauma and through my Christian faith. Because I think there's a powerful intersection between the two. And maybe by the end of this episode, you'll realize that some of the things you've been desperately trying to control were never yours to carry in the first place. All right, let's start here. Imagine being a child in an environment where you don't fully understand what's happening emotionally. Maybe you're constantly trying to figure out someone's mood. You walk into a room and immediately scan it. Who's upset? Who's happy? Is it safe to speak? Should I say something? Should I stay quiet? Did I do something wrong? Do they seem angry? Do they seem disappointed? And eventually, you become incredibly good at reading people. You become hyper-aware. You learn to anticipate. You learn to adjust. You learn to become whatever you think you need to become in order to maintain peace. And you might grow up thinking, I'm just an overthinker. I'm just sensitive. I'm just a people pleaser. I just care too much. But sometimes those behaviors aren't random personality traits. Sometimes they were survival strategies. Because when you were younger, you couldn't control the environment. You couldn't control the adults around you. You couldn't control whether someone was emotionally available. You couldn't control whether someone was angry. You couldn't control whether someone understood you. You couldn't control whether you felt seen. Your little brain did what it could. It said, maybe if I change myself, I can change what happens around me. And that belief can follow you into adulthood. I remember realizing that some of the things I thought were just who I was actually had deeper roots. I had spent so much time trying to understand people, trying to understand their reactions, trying to understand what they meant, trying to understand why they acted the way they did, trying to figure out what I could do differently. And there was something underneath all of that. a desire for control. Not control in the sense of wanting to control other people. Control in the sense of, I need to know what's coming. I need to know that everything is going to be okay. I need to know that I'm loved. I need to know that I'm safe. And when you don't feel like you can depend on the outside world to provide those things, you start trying to manufacture them yourself. You become perfectionistic. You overthink. People please. You constantly analyze. You try to prevent rejection before it happens. You try to fix problems before they become problems. And eventually, you become exhausted because nobody can control life. One of the ideas I took away from Shapiro's exploration of surrender is this challenge to our attachment to control. And I think this is so relevant to trauma healing, because trauma can make us believe, if I can just control enough, I can prevent pain. But here's the painful truth. You can do everything right, and someone can still leave. You can love someone deeply, and they can still hurt you. You can communicate perfectly, and someone can still misunderstand you. You can set healthy boundaries, and someone can still get angry about them. You can pray and still have to wait. You can make a plan, and life can completely change it. And that's terrifying for someone who learned to survive through control. Because control creates the illusion of safety. But eventually you realize control was never the same thing as safety. And that's a hard lesson. Because if you believe control keeps you safe, letting go can feel dangerous. I relate to this so much right now because I'm in a place where I feel like I've done everything, but yet I'm still just waiting on what God has promised me, and I'm confused what's still in the way. And I realized, though I thought I surrendered, I wasn't really surrendered. I was still focusing on the outcome. I was focusing on controlling it. I wanted to figure out how to get more likes, more views. I wanted to have an idea of where this opportunity I was promised was coming from. I wasn't surrendered, and I'm still working daily to fully surrender, but the idea of not being able to control it has released me of the pressure, and now I just feel free. And I hope you find that too. If we take a look at some scripture, Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." I love that scripture because it doesn't say, understand everything first. It says trust. And sometimes faith is exactly that. Trusting God when you don't understand. Trusting God when you don't have all the answers. Trusting God when you don't know how the story ends. And for someone healing from trauma, that can be incredibly uncomfortable. Because trauma says, know everything. Faith says, trust me. Trauma says, predict what happens next. Faith says, take the next step. Trauma says, control the outcome. Faith says, give me the outcome. And that's the tension. Now I want to make something extremely clear. Because when I talk about surrender, I don't mean becoming passive. I don't mean tolerating unhealthy behavior. I don't mean staying in toxic relationships. I don't mean allowing people to mistreat you. I don't mean giving up on your dreams. I don't mean sitting back and saying, well, whatever happens, happens. No, surrender is not weakness. Surrender is not passivity. Surrender is not a lack of boundaries. In fact, sometimes surrender requires tremendous strength. Because you can say, I love you, but I cannot continue participating in this unhealthy dynamic. That's surrender. You can say, I forgive you, but I don't have to give you access to me. That's surrender. You can say, I wanted this relationship to work, but I'm no longer going to force something that isn't healthy. That's surrender. You can say, God, this isn't what I wanted, but I trust you enough to release it. That's surrender. Here's another thing that I think so many people struggle with. The need to be understood. Especially when you've been hurt. You want someone to fully understand what they did. You want them to understand how deeply their words affected you. You want them to understand what you needed as a child. You want them to understand why you became the way you became. And sometimes you spend years trying to get someone to finally say, I understand. But what happens when they never do? What happens when they don't apologize? What happens when they tell a completely different version of the story? What happens when they don't validate your experience? This is where surrender becomes incredibly powerful. Because you have to ask, am I willing to heal even if the person who hurt me never gives me the closure I wanted? That's hard. But the answer can be yes. You don't need their permission to heal. You don't need their understanding to heal. You don't need their apology to begin moving forward. You don't need them to agree with your story. Because your healing cannot depend on someone else's ability to see what they did. Let me say this, because somebody needs to hear it. You don't need someone who hurt you to understand your pain in order for your pain to be valid. Listen again. You don't need their apology to validate what happened. You don't need their acknowledgement to validate your experience. And you don't need them to become a different person in order for you to become a healed version of yourself. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation. Sometimes closure is acceptance. This happened. It hurt me. I deserved better. And I'm choosing to heal anyway. That's freedom. Another thing I think is incredibly important is surrendering the identity you developed because of your wounds. Because sometimes trauma doesn't just affect how you behave, it affects who you believe you are. Maybe you started believing, I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm difficult. Maybe I'm not lovable. Maybe I have to earn love. Maybe I have to be perfect. Maybe I can't trust anyone. Maybe eventually everyone leaves. Maybe I have to do everything myself. But what if those aren't actually your identity? What if they're beliefs that you developed in response to experiences? There's a difference between this is who I am and this is what I learned. And if you learned it, you can unlearn learn it. There came a point where I had to ask myself, who am I without all of the things I've been using to define myself? Who am I without needing everybody's approval of me? Who am I without trying to prove that I'm worthy? Who am I without constantly wondering whether someone is upset with me? Who am I without trying to make everyone happy? Who am I without caring everybody else's emotions? And honestly, that was scary. Because sometimes your coping mechanisms become so familiar that you don't know who you'll be without them. But healing doesn't mean becoming nobody. It means discovering who you were underneath the survival mechanisms. God doesn't need you to be perfect. And this is where my faith becomes such an important part of my healing. Because I spent so much time thinking I had to get everything right. But God isn't asking me to be perfect. He's asking me to trust Him. Matthew 11:28 says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Think about that. Come to me. Not figure everything out. Not fix it yourself. Not become perfect. Just come. And maybe some of us need to stop trying to heal ourselves by carrying everything ourselves. Maybe we need to come to God with the things we don't know how to fix. The grief, the anger, the unanswered questions, the disappointment, the fear, the resentment, the relationship we can't understand, or the future we can't predict. And say, God, I don't know what to do with this anymore. I'm giving it to you. One of the hardest things to surrender is the future. Because when you've experienced pain, uncertainty can feel threatening. You want guarantees. You want to know, will I find love? Will I be successful? Will I be okay? Will this dream happen? Will I ever fully heal? Will I ever feel safe? Will I ever become the person I know I'm supposed to be? And sometimes we become so focused on knowing the ending that we forget to live the chapter we're currently in. But you don't have to know the entire path. You just need enough faith for the next step. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still. Not control everything. Not figure everything out. Not make everybody understand. Be still. Sometimes stillness is where we discover how exhausted we actually are. Let's talk about relationships, because this is where surrender can become extremely practical. Sometimes we want to hold on to people because we're afraid of losing them. We think, if I communicate better, if I love harder, if I become better, if I stop asking for so much, if I become easier to love, maybe they'll stay. But healing teaches you. You cannot make someone choose you. You cannot love someone into emotional availability. You cannot communicate someone into maturity. You cannot sacrifice your boundaries into a healthy relationship. And you cannot become small enough to make someone comfortable. Sometimes surrender means allowing people to make their own choices and allowing yourself to make yours. Here's something I want you to remember. Stop trying to control who stays in your life start becoming so rooted in who you are that you can survive who leaves. That's the difference. The goal isn't nobody ever leaves me. The goal becomes, if someone leaves, I will still have myself. I will still have God. I will still have my purpose. I will still have my peace. That's healing. Another thing healing taught me is that boundaries will sometimes make people uncomfortable. And that's okay. Because if your entire identity is based on being liked, boundaries are gonna feel terrifying. You might think, what if they get mad? What if they think I'm selfish? What if they don't understand? What if they don't like me anymore? But you eventually realize being liked is not the same thing as being loved. And being accepted by everyone isn't the goal. Being aligned with who God created you to be is more important. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is disappoint someone. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can say is no. Sometimes the most courageous sentence is, that doesn't work for me. And then you don't over-explain. You don't beg them to understand. You don't chase their approval. You simply stand in your truth. Let's talk about forgiveness within surrender, because forgiveness gets misunderstood so often in conversations about healing. Forgiveness doesn't mean what happened wasn't that bad. It doesn't mean I trust you again. It doesn't mean you have access to me again. And it doesn't mean I don't have boundaries. Forgiveness can simply mean I'm releasing my life from being controlled by what happened to me. I'm not saying the wound wasn't real. I'm saying I refuse to let the wound become my identity. I refuse to let someone else's behavior determine the rest of my life. I refuse to spend the next 20 years replaying the same moment. I refuse to give someone who hurt me permanent control over my emotional world. That's surrender. So I want to ask you some questions. And I really want you to sit with these. What are you trying to control right now? Are you trying to control someone's opinion of you? Are you trying to control whether someone stays? Are you trying to control someone's emotions? Are you trying to control how quickly you heal? Are you trying to control the future? Are you trying to control whether God answers your prayer in the way you want? Are you trying to control how other people perceive your story? Are you trying to control whether someone finally apologizes? Are you trying to control the outcome of something you've already prayed about? Because maybe, just maybe, that's the thing God is asking you to surrender. If you're listening while driving, obviously keep your eyes on the road. But if you're somewhere safe and comfortable, take a moment. Take a deep breath. In and breathe out again. And I want you to imagine putting down the thing you've been carrying. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's your future. Maybe it's your childhood. Maybe it's the need to understand. Maybe it's the need to be perfect. Maybe it's fear. And say, God, I give this to you. Take another breath. I cannot control everything. Breathe. I don't need to control everything. Breathe. I trust you with what I cannot control. And one more. What happened to me does not have to determine who I become. I want to remind you of something. You are not your anxiety. You are not your people-pleasing. You are not your perfectionism. You are not your fear of abandonment. You are not your need for validation. You are not your childhood. You are not the things someone said about you. You are not the rejection you experienced. You are not the relationship that broke you. You are not what happened to you. Those things may have shaped you, but they don't have to define you. And through healing, you get to decide. This is where the cycle ends. Not because you're blaming your family, not because you're living in anger, but because you're choosing something different. You're choosing awareness, boundaries, self-respect, forgiveness, faith, peace, and yourself. Most importantly, you're choosing to trust God with the parts of your life you cannot control. If I could sit across from the younger version of myself today, I think I would tell her, you never had to work this hard to be worthy of love. You never had to make everybody happy. You never had to understand everybody. You never had to carry everybody. You never had to become perfect. You never had to control everything. You were worthy before you accomplished anything. You were worthy before anyone approved of you. You were worthy before anyone chose you. And you were worthy even when someone failed to recognize your worth. And I think that's one of the most beautiful parts of healing. You stop asking, how can I finally get everyone else to love me? And you start asking, how can I learn to love the person God created me to be? I want to leave you with this. Maybe surrender isn't about giving up your dreams. Maybe it's about giving up the belief that everything has to happen exactly the way you imagined. Maybe surrender isn't about losing control. Maybe it's realizing that control was never what was keeping you safe. Maybe surrender isn't saying, I don't care what happens. Maybe it's saying, I care deeply about what happens, but I trust God more than I trust my fear. And that's a completely different way of living. You can work hard. You can have goals. You can have boundaries. You can protect your peace. You can make wise decisions. You can pursue your calling. You can walk away from unhealthy situations. You can love deeply and still surrender the outcome. Because you were never meant to carry the entire weight of your life by yourself. I want you to take one thing with you today. You don't have to control everything to be okay. You don't have to know exactly how everything is going to work out. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to make everybody understand. You don't have to force people to stay. You don't have to rewrite your past. You just have to take the next step and trust God with the rest. God bless.